The risk landscape is constantly evolving. According to Forrester, 41% of organizations reported experiencing 3 or more critical risk events in the last 12 months alone. By conducting a risk assessment, your organization can develop mitigation strategies to protect employees, business operations, and facilities from potentially dangerous or disruptive events. This video will cover everything you need to know about risk assessments, including what they are, why your company needs them, who should be involved, simple steps to help facilitate them, and how they fit into a broader risk management program. If you are new to risk assessments, or if you're looking for guidance on how to make your current process more efficient, you've come to the right place. Hi, I'm Peter Steinfeld, Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at AlertMedia. I've spent the last 20 years working closely with organizations of all sizes and industries to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. I get questions about risk assessments all the time, the most common being, is this really worth the effort? The short answer is yes, and I'm here to help demystify the process and set you up for success. You may have noticed the free downloadable template in the video description. It's full of guidance, tools, and templates for identifying your organization's most critical threats so you can prioritize and address them. You want to have this template handy when it's time to get started on your assessment, so I encourage you to pause the video now, download it, and then resume the video for best results. But first things first, here's a quick overview of risk assessments for those of you who are just getting started. A risk assessment, also called a threat assessment, is a process for evaluating the likelihood and impact of perceived threats on your organization. It's true that a company can't eliminate operational risk entirely, but it's certainly possible to minimize it. And the good news is, the risk assessment process doesn't have to be difficult, time-consuming, or costly. Business threat assessments play a vital role in protecting employees, operations, and facilities, and every company should include them in a risk mitigation program. Why? Because you can use the information uncovered in the assessment to proactively develop risk mitigation strategies that help you prepare and respond to any threats that come your way. Okay, we've talked about the what and the why, now let's dive into the how. This section of the video will outline the practical steps to conduct a risk assessment, along with the best tools and templates to help you succeed. You'll begin by building your risk assessment team. This team includes safety and security representatives from departments across your organization. At minimum, it should consist of personnel from executive, human resources, and facilities management. The threat assessment team will convene to identify, evaluate, and develop prevention and mitigation strategies for various threats that your business may face. You may also want to include external stakeholders and partners who play a role in emergency response plans, such as local law enforcement officials and mental health professionals. Once your team is established, it's time to get to work. Step 1. Identify threats. You need to be aware of the broad array of hazards and risks that could impact your people and assets. It's important to understand the difference between hazards and risks, so let's break it down. A hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm. Risk is the likelihood of a hazard causing harm and how serious that harm could be. For example, a hazard could be an extension cord running across a high-traffic hallway. The risk is that someone could trip and fall, resulting in an injury. We'll talk about both hazards and risks over the next few minutes, so I just wanted to make that distinction first. It can be helpful to categorize workplace threats by internal and external risks. Internal threats are often more readily apparent and include things like physical workplace hazards, such as working with hazardous materials, frayed cords or wiring, working from heights or slips, trips, and falls. IT issues like internet outages, systems downtime, or corrupted data. Utility outages, including things like water, sewage, or air conditioning and heat, and accidents due to structural collapses or mechanical breakdowns. External threats require you to monitor wider variables. Here are some examples. Severe weather, such as hurricanes, thunderstorms, and heat waves. Natural disasters, like earthquakes or wildfires. Biological threats, such as disease outbreaks and pandemics. Threats involving transportation and supplies, for example, significant road closures, widespread flight delays, and supply chain disruptions. And we can't ignore suspicious activities and acts of workplace violence, which can mean active shooter scenarios, personnel disputes, suspicious packages, or bomb threats. Remember, threats and risks aren't always physical. Many are psychological and can have severe impacts on your employees' mental health and well-being. Psychological risks can include lack of support from a supervisor, high job demands, burnout, or lack of employee engagement. It's just as important to assess these types of risks to ensure a healthy workforce inside and out. Assessing both internal and external risks requires a comprehensive risk analysis of your business, from facilities to supply chain to personnel. Use the examples we just discussed as a starting point and consider the nature of your business and work environments as you ask yourself the question, how will this threat impact my organization? For example, the risks for a software company with a single office in Texas will be substantially different from those of a large multinational manufacturing company with offices scattered all around the world. Step 2. Assess threats. Once you've identified the threats to your business, you need a way to evaluate the impact and likelihood of those threats. I recommend using a risk matrix, also called a probability matrix or impact matrix, which can be useful for performing your threat assessment. The matrix helps assess each threat based on two things: the likelihood that the threat will occur and the potential impact the threat will have on your business. Certain factors increase the likelihood of a threat occurring. Location and history are both important risk factors to consider when evaluating the probability of a threat. When completing a risk assessment matrix, the likelihood of the threat occurring is often ranked on a 5-point scale from improbable to frequent. Here's an example. A company in California has a far greater chance of being impacted by an earthquake or wildfire than a company based in New England. And a company in a major metropolitan city is more likely to be affected by protests and civil disturbances than a company in a small suburban town. It's common for large companies to have many office locations across the country, even across the globe. Each location has its own set of potential threats. With many employees now working remotely or even traveling on a work trip, employers must consider all locations where employees work, not just where the company's facilities are located. Additionally, the impact of a potential threat is the amount of damage or harm the threat could create. On the risk assessment matrix, the severity of a threat is often ranked on a 4-point scale from negligible to catastrophic. When assessing threats, consider all the different types of impact. You can think of impact in 3 broad categories: people, locations, and assets. Consider these 2 different threats as examples for assessment: the threat of a winter storm and a terrorist attack. The first threat has a medium impact but a high likelihood. If you're located in the Northeast, winter storms are guaranteed, but they shouldn't derail your business. The second threat, on the other hand, has a high impact but a low likelihood. It's highly unlikely that your business or people will experience an act of terror, but it would have a huge impact. During this analysis, you might conclude that a winter storm is high risk, whereas an act of terror is medium risk. Be sure to document your analysis of each threat's likelihood and impact in a methodical way. Remember that threat assessment template that I asked you to download at the beginning of the video? That's a great place to start. Step 3, develop controls. Once you have identified the potential threats and you have a way to quantify the impact, you need to plan your responses. This means implementing controls that mitigate the threats you've identified. You'll want to look at your overall risks and decide which actions your business can take to reduce them. For most risks, this means both how do we decrease the likelihood this will happen, and how do we decrease the impact if this does happen. I'll give you another example. If your business is in Chicago, you can expect to face a winter storm. While there's nothing you can do to prevent it from happening, you can minimize the disruption it will have on business operations. In other words, you're decreasing the impact. On the other hand, if employees must work or travel in a region with high crime rates, you may want to focus on reducing both the likelihood and the impact of safety threats to your people. Regardless of the risk, here are a few specific controls you can implement. Train employees. The first and most basic control in business risk management is employee threat assessment training. Ensure your entire organization knows and understands what threats may occur. Individuals should be trained in how these threats may impact their role and the business itself. This training will help them better understand the response plan and how they should act during an emergency, especially for high likelihood threats. The most effective employee training involves active participation. The most common is a fire drill, but you can also consider other active drills like health emergencies or sheltering in place. Remember, the benefit of an active drill is building muscle memory. Tabletop exercises are also an option. They're great because they're a lighter lift and have less impact on daily operations. Create policies. Create threat assessment procedures and guidelines to mitigate the identified threats. For example, in a severe winter storm, you need a policy for notifying employees of delays or closures. Develop a comprehensive corporate travel policy to keep traveling employees safe from the variety of threats they may encounter. Your threat assessment procedures should indicate when third parties, such as law enforcement or mental health services, need to be involved. Document emergency response plans. As every emergency management professional will tell you, the best time to prepare for an emergency is before it occurs. By creating an emergency response plan, which is a documented series of steps your organization will take during an emergency, you can help ensure employee safety and minimize the impact on critical operations. The goal is to reduce or prevent human injury and property damage during threatening situations by documenting the steps for a timely response that's tailored to each scenario. Step 4. Evaluate your response. Once you've identified a threat, assessed its impact, and responded to it, you must evaluate your response. Here are some questions I recommend that you reflect on. Did we properly assess the likelihood of this threat? Did we properly assess the impact of this threat? Was this threat avoidable? How quickly were we able to respond? Was our communication effective? Did we have the proper resources to address the threat? Once you've answered these questions, it's time to turn to the big question. What can we do better? Spoiler alert, you'll never have the perfect response to a threat. Even when you execute your plan to a T, look for ways to improve it based on how it worked. Don't let good be the enemy of great. Talk to employees, especially those directly impacted by the threat. By soliciting employee feedback, you can uncover weaknesses in your plan that you may not have recognized otherwise. Now, this is where the process becomes iterative. Once you've evaluated your response and identified areas for improvement, return to step 1. Repeat the process, integrating the new relevant information and feedback that you've received. The risk assessment process may seem daunting, and with good reason. Each company begins the process knowing that a perfect outcome is nearly impossible. It's hard to stay motivated under those circumstances. But rest assured, minimizing operational risk becomes more manageable with time. Your internal controls will mature, resulting in fewer problems slipping through the cracks. And as employees buy into the processes, they understand their value and work cohesively toward a safer environment for themselves and their coworkers. Performing regular threat assessments is an effective way to ensure that your energy is focused on mitigating the highest priority threats. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the quickest and easiest way to get started on or improve your current risk assessment process is to use the handy threat assessment template that you downloaded earlier. It includes the risk matrix tool we talked about, suggestions for additional resources, and modern technology solutions that can make threat assessments faster and easier. No organization likes to think about experiencing a threat that could damage its people or business, but an effective and efficient risk assessment process can help you avoid it. Thanks again for joining me, and on behalf of all of us at AlertMedia, stay safe out there.